Welcome to Celluloid Circuits, the podcast where we break down the intersections of technology and film. I'm Anthony. In the first episode of our series, we're diving into the movie that sparked the idea for this podcast, Johnny Mnemonic, the 1995 cyberpunk classic based on a story by the father of cyberpunk, William Gibson. So get your Synologic 16 and GPL stealth modules ready, and let's jack in. If you haven't seen it, Johnny Mnemonic is a sci-fi action film set in a dystopian future. Johnny Mnemonic, played by Keanu Reeves, is a data courier. His cybernetic brain implant lets him carry sensitive information directly in his head. He's hired to transport a file containing data so critical that it could cure a global pandemic called nerve attenuation syndrome, or NAS, going forward. However, there's a catch. It's a film. There's always a catch. The file size exceeds his storage capacity, putting him at risk of dying unless he can offload the data in time. From there, chaos ensues. Johnny finds himself hunted by a ruthless megacorporation, the Yakuza, and a fanatical preacher with cybernetic enhancements, played by Dolph Lundgren. Yes, his character is as over-the-top as you're imagining. Johnny's only allies are Jane, a bodyguard played by Dina Meyer, a resistance leader named J-Bone, played by Ice-T, because why not, it's the 90s, and Jones, a cybernetically enhanced dolphin who hacks into his brain. It's as gloriously absurd as it sounds. The movie is pure cyberpunk, a grimy high-tech world where corporate greed reigns supreme, wealth disparities are stark, and humanity wrestles with the ethical dilemmas of technological advancement. And being a 90s movie, it kicks off with a scrolling text crawl for exposition, because of course it does. Set in an alternate 2021, the world of Johnny Mnemonic feels uncomfortably close to home, especially in how it depicts global pandemics, corporate dominance, and our uneasy relationship with technology. Since NAS is central to the film's story, that's where we'll start. NAS, or nerve attenuation syndrome, sounds a little more medical than it does sci-fi. While I'm not a doctor, attenuation is a word I recognize, at least in the tech field. It's defined as the loss of signal strength, usually in reference to the distance of a cable. Latin roots break it down to mean to lessen or thin out. So at its face value, NAS or NAS could be viewed as a thinning or weakening of the nerves. NAS seems to target these nerve pathways, creating symptoms similar to real-world neuromuscular disorders. So what happens if a nerve was to weaken, or if our nerves were to weaken? According to Cedars-Sinai, symptoms can include muscle weakness, twitching, cramps, balance issues, and even breathing difficulties. We see similar effects in the film with characters like Jane showing tremors and seizures, or as referenced in the film, the Black Shakes. This makes NAS feel eerily grounded in reality, resembling conditions like ALS or MS. Sound familiar? You might remember ALS, the disease spotlighted by the 2014 Ice Bucket Challenge. Let's give the film some points for plausibility symptoms and terminology. Now, what about how NAS spreads? Henry Rollins' character explains it's all the technology in the world poisoning the airwaves. Sound familiar? It's similar to that old cell phone paranoia. You're going to get brain cancer holding a phone up to your ear, and more recently, concerns over 5G. Interestingly, the World Health Organization acknowledges something called electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or EHS. EHS causes symptoms like headaches, fatigue, and anxiety, though the cause is still unknown. The World Health Organization states that while these symptoms are real, there's no evidence linking them to EMF exposure. Studies have suggested that environmental factors like fluorescent-like flickering or even stress may be the culprits. NAS transmissions based in fear? Yes. Truth? Probably not. We can't forget the end of the film, with the cybernetic dolphin Jones. I love this part of the film, even if it feels pretty bonkers. Joan helps Johnny hack into his brain and discover the rest of the still images needed for the download code. And through all that, we're treated to a 3D representation of hacking one's brains. At first glance, it might seem absurd, but cybernetically enhanced animals aren't as fictional as we might think. In fact, some researchers today are working on animal-machine interfaces, particularly with animals like rats and dogs. They're using this research to understand neural pathways and even experiment with robotic enhancements to better understand the effects on humans. So while we might not see hacking dolphins anytime soon, there's a slight realism to the concept of wet-wired devices. But here's the thing. We're still quite far from developing implants capable of direct interaction with computers. Nothing even close to Johnny's ability to jack in and directly load data into his brain. Today's closest counterpart would be brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, which are primarily used in the experimental stages to control prosthetics. Some BCIs have shown potential in basic device control, but we're not yet at a point where a person can upload a data package into their brain like Johnny can. Right now, these BCI technologies remain in testing. The company Neuralink has recently gotten FDA approval for human trials, but we're likely at least a decade away from any widespread commercial availability. So while Johnny's implant serves as an interface and his brain as the storage, we're just not there yet. Current implants are still focused on physical functions, not data transfer. So what would it take us to get to Johnny's level of implant? Let's break down what his implant seems capable of in the movie. First, it transforms brain matter into storage space. Then it allows data to flow smoothly between his brain and other external devices. It seems to perform some form of complex encoding, and it can also receive firmware updates, kind of like your smartphone. One of the scenes that illustrates this beautifully is when Johnny receives a call from Ralphie about a critical upgrade. In the elevator, Johnny connects a PEMX memory doubler to boost his storage from 80 to 160 gigabytes. Remember, this is the 90s, the age of zip disks and CDR/DVD-R. So maybe max portable storage would be 8 gigabytes, considering the end of that technology, DVD-R. In the film, Johnny is carrying Call of Duty Cold War size gigabytes, a whopping 300 plus. How does the memory doubler work? It's possible it either gains access to additional brain matter, effectively overwriting memories like you would delete files, or it improves or changes the compression to squeeze in more data. Let's take a look at both and see why I think it's one over the other. But first, we need to get a little gritty with the tech. All right, let's talk about data compression. This is one of the things that Johnny Mnemonic may use when he upgrades his implant with a PEMX memory doubler, as using his compression would work to increase storage space without using up more physical space. Data compression is the process of reducing the size of a file or dataset so that it takes up less space. Imagine you have a box of packing peanuts and you squeeze it down to half its size without changing the number of peanuts inside. That's what compression does with digital information. It finds ways to store the same data just with less space. There are two main types of compression, lossless and lossy. With lossless compression, every single bit of data is preserved. This type is commonly used for files where accuracy is critical, like text documents, databases, or certain image formats. An example of lossless comparison is the use of zip files. On the other hand, lossy compression reduces file size by discarding less noticeable data. For example, MP3 audio files or JPEG images use lossy compression, cutting out frequencies in sound or colors in images that our eyes and ears may not notice much. This can dramatically reduce file sizes, but it does sacrifice a little quality. Imagine cropping a few unimportant pixels out of a photo. You still recognize the image, but it's slightly lighter in terms of data. So in Johnny Mnemonic, if his implant could perform something like compression, it might work similarly to lossless techniques, as I assume a mnemonic courier is carrying critical data that should not be altered. Compressing data before storage would let Johnny carry more information while taking up less of his brain's neural space. But is that really what's going on? Upon my initial viewing of the film, I had assumed that Johnny's implant was simply a sophisticated storage device equipped with external interfaces and input mechanisms. However, a pivotal moment occurs when Johnny explains the nature of mnemonic couriers to Jane. During this explanation, he reveals that the process necessitates dumping some long-term memories, specifically childhood recollections. This revelation, which is also prominently featured in the film's trailer, provides conclusive evidence that Johnny's brain matter itself serves as the actual storage medium for the data he transports. This makes the memory doubler even more unsettling. It's not just adding space, it's erasing Johnny's humanity. The movie does not explain exactly how the tech works, but I'm going to try my best by breaking down the data upload scene. So when Johnny first meets the scientists, we see that he breaks out the tools of his trade. He goes through the instructions about the still images on the TV frames to the two scientists and puts on the VR goggles. He jacks into his equipment, which kind of looks like a taken apart Sony Walkman with mini disc, but moving on. We then get to see what Johnny sees, the data flashing in front of his eyes. So what I believe is going on is that by jacking in, he is interfacing with his implant, telling it to record all viewed information in long-term memory. So while that data is being displayed in front of his eyes, the implant is recording how the neurons are firing, which we will see is important later on. And the data is stored in his long-term memory. Throughout this scene, we see Johnny is in obvious discomfort, if not pain, which is a reoccurring theme in the film. Interfacing with data or the internet is harmful. It was Gibson's idea that the internet would be a taxing environment. I'm glad to see that this made it into the film. Let's explore the storage capacity of the human brain and a little bit of how memory works. Scientists suggest that the human brain might hold up to 2.5 petabytes of data. For context, that's enough storage for about 3 million hours of TV. You'd have to watch non-stop for over 300 years to fill that up. But the brain doesn't store data in simple standalone units like a hard drive or solid-state drive. Memories are stored as certain patterns of firing neurons, creating a highly efficient and resilient storage system. The brain's ability to store and organize data through these complex networks is frankly on another level compared to our digital systems. But because of the way that memories are made, that is why a certain firing of neurons may retrieve a memory. For example, a smell triggering a thought of a specific memory that includes that smell's memory firing pattern in it. While we never get to see a proper download scene in the film, in my opinion, this is how it would play out. Johnny would be shown the 3 still frames from the TV, and by viewing those 3 frames, it would bring up the memory from long term. Then the implant would decode those neurons firing based on the collected data previously, and the download could occur. It seems, at least from a plot perspective, that the only way to remove the stored material is to download it. And believe me, Johnny wants this information out of his head, because all of that extra information has caused synaptic seepage, a term used in the film. The synapses are the areas where neurons communicate with one another. If there is seepage into these areas, an area that should not be altered, which could cause neurons to misfire or not fire at all, I could only imagine the type of issues that this would occur. Obviously, death is a result, as warned in the film to Johnny. A medical term for this that you may have heard is neuropathy. So, what is this information that everyone is trying to get a hold of out of Johnny's head? Well, as the viewer knows at this point, if they've seen the film, it's the cure for NAS. But why all the fuss to retrieve it and no attempts to safeguard it? A recurring theme in Johnny Mnemonic is corporate greed. Pharmacom, the mega corporation at the center of the plot, possesses the cure for NAS, but chooses not to release it. Why? Because treating the disease is more profitable than curing it. This echoes real-world criticisms of pharmaceutical industries where companies have been accused of prioritizing profit over public health. Just think about the person that took over creation of insulin and how much that went up and the fight over that. Film's depiction of corporate corruption feels way too relevant. It raises questions about how much power we allow corporations to wield, especially when their bottom line takes precedence over human lives. We hear in a passing comment in the film when Johnny says that he's going to talk to these Pharmacom people because they're corporate and they're going to negotiate. And just how corrupt they are, you hear Jane respond with, "So is the Yakuza." So it just shows the motives that this company is willing to go through over profit versus healthcare needs. The last thing I want to take a look at is the advancements in AI, because that's what everyone is talking about these days. Multiple times in the film, we see this AI disembodied head appear to both Johnny Mnemonic as well as Mr. Takahashi. We later learn this is Anna Carmen, the founder and former CEO of Pharmacom, who was imprinted on the company's neural net. We see that this AI, I call it a virtual intelligence, so VI, but the film references it as an AI, so that's what we're going to keep. This AI has decided to be sympathetic to the plight of Johnny as well as the NAS underground, so much so that she aids them in recovering the cure, eventually getting herself burned out from Pharmacom's mainframe, which, at least in this film, accounts for murder, because according to the film, the AI has Swiss citizenship under the artificial intelligence laws of 2006, which tells me that AI has advanced to the point where we deem it sentient enough to have its own citizenship, as well as all the perks that could come along with that. Beyond just the technology, Johnny Mnemonic also plays into our cultural fears about data and privacy. In today's world, we rely on secure methods to protect sensitive information, whether it's medical records, financial data, or corporate secrets. In the 90s, this concept of literally carrying data in your head might have seemed wild, but now with discussions around data encryption, cyber warfare, and surveillance, it feels oddly prescient. And maybe the only way to now safely store data in our ever-connected world is in our head. Its themes around tech-induced illness, data security, and bioenhancements may have been far out sci-fi in the 90s, but they hit really hard today, as that seems to be our future. There are so many other tech things in this film, and I want to discuss all of them, but that would take way too long, so maybe we'll revisit the film. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Celluloid Circuits. Next time, we'll be discussing the intersection of technology and privacy with the film Anon. You won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this film and any other films you think we should cover. Until next time, remember to stay curious, and remember, the future is only a reel away.